We feel really honored that you're coming out of stealth on the SCAPA podcast.
I'm so excited to be doing it here. This is fun.
It means a lot to me and means a lot to us at Saab. So I want to thank you for doing that. Hello and welcome to the SCAPA podcast with me, Michael Brasseur, where we invite visionary leaders across government, academia, and industry to share their big, bold vision of the future. But more importantly, how do those visions come to life? And we have a very special guest with us today, Brennan Grignon. So Brennan this is a very, very special episode because you're going to come out of stealth. You're incubating something at Red Cell.
Yes. Today's
the big day. So do you want to share the name of your company and what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thank you for having me. And I really appreciate the relationship that Red Cell has with SCAPA and with Saab.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking forward to telling our introductory story. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've been at Red Cell now for about almost a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
I was asked to come on board because they believe that there is an opportunity in the supply chain analytics space to build a new forward-leaning technology. And I had worked with Mark Esper and Veronica Daigle previously in my job at the Pentagon. And they said, do you think there's something there? And to be honest, I never thought about being a founder. Bootstrapping a startup was not something that was really in my capability set. And so they gave me the opportunity to have the Red Cell incubation, which gives me all the back office function, and I can just focus on the problem set.
Mm-hmm.
So Vantiv is the name of the company. It is a portmanteau between vantage and quantitative. So we give you a new vantage point for your supply chain based on quantitative analysis that's informed by experts who have actually lived this problem day in and day out, like myself. So we were incorporated just over a year ago. I now have 3 members of my team, which is fantastic. And 2026 is our year. We're coming out of stealth, and we're really looking forward to the future.
Well, that's so exciting. And, for our guest, we had a really good session. I think it was the end of the summer or early fall out in San Diego with Red Cell and a bunch of your cohort of founders, and was just really impressed with not only the vision that you have, but the way you go after niches in a very precise way. Is there a process that you're running through at Red Cell to do that, or is it just searching out problems that nobody's sort of focused on? Or
it depends.
Yeah.
So there's 3 practice areas at Red Cell. There's the healthcare practice, which was the core foundation of Red Cell that Grant Verstandig stood up when he first started Red Cell. And then the national security and cyber practices have evolved over the last year and a half, 2 years. And some of the founders are individuals who actually had their own companies and were in a pre-seed stage, and they came to Red Cell with an idea and established technology. Other companies are more like myself, where Red Cell has a problem set and they go through the discovery phase. So they bring on a subject matter expert, have the person, myself in the case of Vantiv, do all of the market research and validate the hypothesis, and then go to the investment committee of Red Cell and say, this is what I'd like to build. So there's sort of 2 pathways. And we like to say at Red Cell, we are a funding startup.
Yeah.
So we're all sort of in a similar stage of growth, which is really exciting because we all get to try out new things, and everyone's very, very motivated by the missions that we support. And it's just an exciting time. And I get to be a founder of a startup, which I've had a very interesting career, which has been really fun. And this is not something I've tried yet.
Well, actually, let's take a moment to walk sort of your career, and we'll walk it right up to Vantiv, and then we'll go vertical on Vantiv for a little bit.
Okay.
And then we'll sort of ask what your view of the future. This is the SCAPA podcast, Creating the Future, and it's kind of the cliffhanger for all of our listeners.
Okay.
So, Brendan, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What sort of influenced your upbringing?
So I grew up in Long Beach, California, not far from the SCAPA office.
Yeah.
So when I got to go visit and be on the bay in San Diego, I was happy as a clam.
Yeah.
I grew up, my dad was in the military active duty, special operations. His dad had also been in the military, and I have 4 younger brothers, 2 of whom are also in the Army, one of whom is still serving. And so I grew up in a military family, which, in this day and age is unusual. And so that definitely had an influence on me. My parents were very much in mind of like service.
Mm-hmm.
Service was a big thing. Service to community, service to country was a big focus of our upbringing. And just being a kid in Southern California, I had moved 3 times by the time I was 4 because of my dad's service, but then we settled in Southern California. He went into reserve duty and then went into construction. So we just had kind of a be outside all the time, run around, play things, play games, play sports. Sports was a big thing. And that was a huge part of who I was and who I am. And I'm really lucky. My brothers are all super supportive, and we all have very, very different careers, which makes it really interesting when we all get together.
I have 1 daughter and 3 boys, and so it was funny because her mentor was down for her soccer tournament this past weekend, and her mentor is a soccer player at Stanford, and it was so funny to see my daughter just gravitate to a little like a big sister because she's got 3 brothers and was looking for somebody to identify with and
on a different level.
Latch on to. So you grow up in Long Beach. Where'd you end up going to school?
So I came out here actually to DC out east for college. And so I got my undergrad and graduate degree at American University. And then from there just had a sort of varying career path.
All right. And so after college, you went into investment banking, or what was the...
Yeah. So first I went into private wealth management. At the time, there was a program where they would recruit college athletes. So I was a Division I athlete, and they would recruit athletes into private wealth management. So it was an interesting sort of time to be in that space. And I found myself as one of the only females. I was the only female in my broker class, which looking back, everyone's like, oh, interesting. I was like, this is my life. I have only brothers. This feels very comfortable to me.
So what sport did you play in college?
I actually swam in college.
Okay.
Yeah, I had played water polo. And at that time, there weren't a lot of varsity water polo. This was early days.
Yes.
And I'm dating myself, obviously. Women's sports has amazingly come a long way. And so swimming was the more...
Very cool. We've had Larson Jensen on the podcast.
I saw him. Yeah.
That was really interesting to see his perspective, from growing up as a swimmer, doing special forces and then joining the venture space. It was a really interesting story.
A different perspective.
Yeah, it's a different perspective because you're in the water by yourself. You're racing the clock, right? I mean, that's what you're up against, right?
Yeah. And I had played team sports, like water polo was my primary sport. So it was an adjustment for me. But I also think it provided me with a lot of great opportunity to build self-motivation and time management skills and just like basic executive function in college, because it is a year-round sport when you're in college in D1. I look back now and I talk to friends. They had a totally different college experience than I did. But I think that's kind of stuck with me in terms of being able to figure out how you prioritize your time and where you put your time and energy.
Gotcha. All right. So what'd you learn in that? Did you do another job in finance?
So I went from private wealth management into more institutional risk management.
Okay.
So I went to work for a small risk advisory firm, a family-owned firm that basically did risk management for the financial portfolios of private equity firms. And that was the very early days of building dashboards using Monte Carlo simulations and all that.
Okay.
And so that was really my first taste of using different types of technology and honestly different type of math to do major kind of muscle movements, planning muscle movements for businesses. And so while I was there, I built a dashboard. And again, this is early 2000s before the recession, built a dashboard using Monte Carlo simulation. But it was interesting to be part of that sort of evolution of how do we use the internet and these new technologies to make planning and forecasting more efficient and effective and more able to react to all the different permutations.
Okay, so that's probably going to come up later as we talk about Vantive,
It
right?
is.
So is this when you went into government after that?
So I went from there into government contracting. So I had always wanted to work in the national security space.
Okay.
I mentioned my dad was in the Army and my brothers. And so I had been attempting to get into the national security space and was introduced to a company called LMI, which is a organization based here in the DC area. And I worked for them for a while. At the time, they are now a for-profit company, but at the time, they were a 501c3 and they had held on to the legacy research program, the federally funded Research and Development Corporation that they were when McNamara founded them in the 50s. And I was asked to run that research program. So I spent a number of years running LMI's Research Institute, which has now been spun off into its own separate entity called Noble Reach. And this was when the organization and the government, the Department of Defense particularly, was looking at how do you take AI and machine learning and apply it to really hard logistics and supply chain problems. So we were doing things like determining how we could use machine learning algorithms to help the fire service, the forest fire service, better plan their routes during fire efforts. It was when we were trying to figure out what is the implications of additive manufacturing shipboard.
Okay.
So it was...
What time frame was this?
This was 2012 to 2014-ish.
Okay.
And so there was just a lot of interesting experimentation. I had 40 different projects under LMI's Research Institute, and then we had another dozen projects with different universities around the state of Virginia, University of Michigan, et cetera.
So you're doing this research and what comes after that?
Yeah, so I was at the LMI Research Institute, and there's a program within the department. It's actually within the entire federal government called an Intergovernmental Personnel Act, an IPA position. You are essentially on loan from a nonprofit, academic, or other government agency to your whatever agency you're assigned to. And I went to the Department of Defense. And then that started my career at DoD, where I eventually became a full-time civilian. And I worked in the Office of Industrial Policy. Industrial-based policy is what it's called now. Yeah. At the time, that was within the Office of the Undersecretary for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics. And during my time there, it then became the Office of the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment. So I was there during the bifurcation of AT&L into the Research and Engineering and Acquisition and Sustainment arm.
All right. So what was in your portfolio there at the Pentagon? What were you working on?
Yeah, so when I started during the Obama administration. Frank Kendall, Mr. Kendall was the undersecretary at the time, and originally the job was specifically on industry engagement. So mostly maintaining our relationships from ANS and the department to all of our suppliers, large to small, for all of our foreign and domestic partners on the industry side. After when the first Trump administration started, Ellen Lord came in, and my portfolio expanded to include all the industrial-based collaboration between our allies and partners, so government to government. So all the work we do with the Five Eyes, all the work we do with NATO, Japan, et cetera, on what are your industrial-based issues, what are our industrial-based issues, and how do we support each other, not only for interoperability, but also economic security, collectively against our adversaries. And then the third piece of my job came in 2016. President Trump signed an executive order, 13806 for your listeners who want to look it up, which asked the Department of Defense to do an assessment of the defense industrial base and figure out where our major pain points were, where we could make changes. That had not been done since 1937. A lot has changed since then. And so I actually led that effort. At the time, Eric Tuning, who's now at HII, was the Deputy Assistant Secretary, and he and I had a team, an interagency team. So I had people across the entire interagency of about 200 people working on that effort. And so then my title became the Director of Supply Chain Resilience and Industry Engagement for the Department of Defense, it was a pretty big portfolio. It's now 3 different Deputy Assistant Secretary jobs. So my job got parsed, which I think is great. And so that was like all of the pieces that I'd done with the industry engagement, the industrial policy work, then helped facilitate that assessment of the industrial base.
And what was the result of the assessment?
So we delivered it in 2017. I'm very proud to say that we met the 270-day timeline that was given to us. We essentially came up with, I believe it was, I have to go back and look, but there was about 8 to 10 core areas where there was major issues. Munitions, missiles and munitions. We looked at shipbuilding, ground combat vehicles, semiconductors. And from that, we came up with a host of recommendations that the interagency could implement. But as you can imagine, our day jobs then started to take over, and then COVID happened.
What's really flexed the supply chain, right? So you got to see almost like the worst case scenario. What did you learn through COVID? Did it affirm what you had believed going into the report, or?
It did. It did in many ways. I actually had a really unique opportunity then. So I, at the time, was asked, the Department of Defense within the first month of COVID, so this is now March 2020, was asked to stand up a task force to look at what are the critical medical resources we need and what is our ability to actually surge production of them. So we were helping backstop HHS because they at the time didn't have a lot of supply chain muscle in the organization. And so I was asked to help lead that effort. So again, 200 people across the entire department, HHS, FEMA, and we were working on, at the very start of it, where can we get more masks, ventilators, gloves, gowns, syringes, and then how do we actually move them? Then FEMA would figure out, Admiral Plachek was leading the FEMA task force, how do we move them around the world to get them to the U.S.? And then subsequent from that initial surge phase, which was probably the first 3 to 4 months, we then quickly pivoted to start looking at, well, now we need to produce more of these things. Who has excess capacity that we can tap into? And how long is it going to take? How much money do they need? Mm-hmm. So that's where we also worked with HHS on executing CARES Act funding into companies like 3M or Puritan, who was the manufacturer of the nasal pharyngeal swabs that we all needed for test kits.
Oh, you're just bringing up.
I know everyone's going to have PTSD.
Yeah.
I did too.
Yeah.
But like, that's a great example. So in that situation, you know, here I am, not really a medical supply chain expert, but we had amazing people from the Department of Health, of the DoD's health agency, DHA. We had incredible people who had worked on Ebola. They had worked on SARS, all these different pandemic responses across the world. And I remember one of them saying to me, they're like, I'm the medical expert. You're the supply chain expert. We will figure this out. So with Puritan, they had capacity, but the machine that was used to spin the cotton onto the end of the tip was a German-made machine. Everyone needed more of those machines. The lead time to create new machines was months. So we had to figure out what they could give us in terms of machinery, and then how long it was going to take for us to get other machines, and then what that meant to the actual capacity we could build into Puritan's system.
All right. So you come out of COVID, like 22 timeframe. When do you decide to leave government?
So 2021, so the task force that I was on at the end of 2020 was created as it's now an enduring office within DoD. So we all went back to our day jobs.
I'm sensing a trend here. Like a lot of stuff you incubated, became institutionalized.
Yeah. And so it's now called the Defense Assisted Acquisition Office. It's within the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell. And I had the opportunity to stand up. Here are all the authorities that we used. Here's how we staffed it. If there's another pandemic, here's how we would surge resources and manpower to do it again. I go back to my day job, and in January of 2021, President Biden signs Executive Order 14017 and says, DOD, where's the industrial base at?
Okay.
And Health and Human Services, what about active pharmaceuticals? Department of Energy, do you understand the industrial base of high-capacity lithium-ion batteries? Department of Commerce and DHS, can you figure out what our choke points are in semiconductor manufacturing? So I was asked by DOD to spearhead that effort under President Biden. And I had team members and former colleagues in the White House who asked me to help teach the other agencies, like, how do you approach this massive effort? And so I did that. And then I said, I'm going to go do something else.
Okay. So you did that. So that was your final
So
thing.
that was my final hurrah.
But you're obviously an entrepreneur. You were an entrepreneur in government, right? So you were always
I
creating.
never thought of it that way.
You were always carving out new territory. This is kind of, it's in my bloodstream as well. I was doing similar stuff on the operational side, first at NATO and then at Task Force 59. But I think we share sort of like a kindred soul in terms of creating, whether it be in government or now in industry. And actually, Skapa is Swedish for to create. So I feel like you're kind of coming home here on the Skapa podcast. All right. So you leave government in what year? 2023? Or?
That was 2022. So January 2022 was my first month on the other side. And then I admittedly, I took a left turn. I just wanted to try something new. And also, I wonder if you've had this experience in your career. Sometimes when you're trying to solve the hard problems, whether you volunteer or you're voluntold to do that,
right?
Sometimes at least I get to the point where I'm like, maybe it's me. Yes. Maybe the problem isn't that hard, and I've just been working on it for too long. And someone with fresh thoughts and new eyes, they can solve this problem. So I went into the nonprofit space and I worked in maternal health nonprofits running operations for different small organizations that I could just make a really big impact, kind of help get them on their feet, get them up and running, and allow them to impact the community that they're trying to serve. So I did that for a few years. And then I had coffee with Veronica Daigle just to reconnect.
Yes.
And say, she was at Boeing at the time. She had left the Pentagon as well. And how are things? And that's when she said, would you want to maybe start a startup? And I said, I don't know. Let me think about it.
I love it.
And that's how this all started.
And then then sort of you joined the Red Cell team as an entrepreneur in residence?
Yeah. So they asked me to, so I met with Veronica, and then she and I met with Mark Esper, and I met with Israel Brumer, who, he and I had worked at the Pentagon. He was on the COVID task force during COVID together, we were there. And they said, here's you'll be in discovery mode.
Yeah.
So here's the problem that we think exists. What do you think about finding a solution, building a technology solution? And so I did that for 4 months and then came to the investment committee and said, this is what I'd like to build. And they said, yes. And
all right. So I love founder stories. I mean, I love them. So when you came to the board, and you kind of previewed it there in the intro, what did you tell you called it the funding board or
the investment committee?
The investment committee,
which is the funding mechanism for Red Cell. So what Vantiv is currently the way that planning tools in businesses and organizations work is that they are not as proactive and visionary as we'd like them to be, right? They tend to be much more reactive to, there is a supply chain disruption. Now what do we do about it? And what we're building is a proactive, forward-looking model that lets you rise above all of the noise and look ahead to say, if I were to have this disruption, if I were to have this type of impact, tariffs, a geopolitical event, an earthquake, hurricane, et cetera, what are my options? So our tool actually does the optionality for you, and it runs thousands and thousands of playing the tape forward to allow you to see, where should you make that next investment? Or in some cases, where do you not have an alternative? You have a sole source supplier. You are one of many companies across your subsector and then horizontally across the industrial base, and there aren't alternatives. So then how does potentially you and your compatriots look to the government to say, hey, we need more CHIPS Act funding to have the capability to build more of the types of semiconductors that we need? So it's very much a forward-leaning view of supply chain disruption and a scenario planning capability that helps you build that muscle movement into your business.
And so it's kind of clear to me this is basically the culmination of all your experiences in government, sort of going deep on these problems from a whole of government point of view. But now is it also from the bottom up point of view, or what's the input? What's the input to the? Is it software that you're delivering?
Yeah, we're delivering software, but we're delivering also like consultative services around it. So one of the things that I experienced on the other side is I was very often approached by technology companies that said, we have a solution to your problem. I'd be like, great, that's fantastic. And they'd show me a demo, and I would oftentimes ask a lot of very challenging, I was told very challenging questions. I'm like, they're really important questions.
Exactly.
About where you're getting the data. How have you verified the data? What is the integrity, or what is your confidence level of the conclusions that you've drawn? And oftentimes there's a lot of hand waving, and they're like, don't worry about it. And then, potentially we would buy the software, and I would want to just have it on my desktop to query questions, because my life was at 4:00 on a Friday. There was always a joke in my office. If the phone rings, don't answer it, because it's the White House, or it's the SecDef's office, because they got a call from the White House. And we now need to know what are our supply chain choke points in Turkey, because we are now going to stop importing any materials from Turkey because of S-400s.
Okay, gotcha.
That was a real life example that is on the public record.
Yeah.
So from 4 to 8 o'clock at night, I would make phone calls, run around the Pentagon, put together a summary. I wanted a tool that could tell me that information. And I would be sold a bill of goods that essentially was like, we have that tool, but it also comes with like these 4 people that you need in order to query the tool. And also it's not as dynamic as we actually said it was, and we're not 100% sure where we're getting this information. So now I get to build what I always wish I had. I get to build what my colleagues who still are in the Pentagon working on this problem set, what I want them to have. And also one of the things that I found in my experience, and I've found this across sectors, we're working in the oil and gas space, we're working in medical devices, we're working in aerospace and defense. There's a lot of institutional knowledge that human beings have. And when they leave, that goes out the window.
Yeah.
And a lot of that it's about what happened in the past, but it's also often about this happened and we had these different options, and we took option A because options B, C, and D were not viable, or they weren't really strong options for us as a business. And so what Vantiv also does is it becomes your knowledge management capture for all that. So you have all of this historical knowledge from your team in the actual modeling that you have. And then you have this view of the industrial base underneath it, because you, Airbus, Lockheed Martin, Puritan, are not the only ones that are trying to tap into those machine tools, that casting and forging house, those semiconductor producers, that PCBA manufacturer. You are also being influenced by GM and Ford, or Apple, or Android. And you need to know how that horizontal play on the industrial base actually plays out in your business, so you can figure out what realistic levers you can pull, and then how you plan for that, so that you then go back to your shareholders. And this is where the finance person in me comes back. I'm all about the public good. I obviously come from a family, decades of service. But at the end of the day, shareholders, stock valuations, risk to revenue is what drives business decisions. So our tool focuses on that so that you can make informed decisions from that perspective.
This is brilliant. And you just kind of take me back to San Diego when you explained it to me the first time. But I didn't get the founder story, so it was really nice to hear that. And again, we feel really honored that you're coming out of stealth on the Scapa podcast.
I'm so excited to be doing it here. This is fun.
It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to us at Saab. So I want to thank you for doing that. So it sounds like you have multiple customer bases here. The governments could be a customer.
Absolutely.
Businesses could be a customer.
Yep.
Is this also relevant in like the financial markets? Who do you see as your customers, and who are you going after?
Yeah, I think So we've had some really great opportunities because I'm a supply chain person. My right-hand man, my team member, Alex Patino, is my head of product and engineering. He has a quant trading background, and he is just an amazing, brilliant, fantastic human who came into this and said, I don't know anything about supply chain, teach me. And we have just had a blast teaching each other about all these different, the modeling we can do, the math, the foundational math that he's building, and then how we can use AI to make it more effective and efficient. And then my advisors, one of whom was a chief supply chain officer for decades at a major oil and gas company, one of whom worked at the department with me. She and I sat this close together in problem sets and worked on tons of munitions issues and still works in that space. We're always the ones that are prosecuting the information that our customers are giving us. Don't take it at face value. Assume the Excel spreadsheets we get have human error inputs in them. And so we're looking across the entire sector, but our ideal customer on the manufacturing side, we have some major big banner name customers or prospects right now, but we're looking at, I think we would provide a lot of value in the mid-size market. I think from a sort of persona, people who are recognizing that AI is a tool that they can use and they're not afraid of it. And they also recognize that it's going to be some work on the front end to actually get the right data clean, foundationally inputted into the system, but they have an appetite for doing business differently, and they're willing to make that investment. And more, I think, as we've been, now we're, 5 years since the onset of COVID, I think that between the experience of COVID, the geopolitical activities that have happened over the last 5 years, the current administration's sort of news of the day perspective when it comes to things that really seriously impact businesses from a supply chain perspective. People want to be able to play out all the possibilities to figure out where they should spend their time and money, particularly their money.
Yeah.
And that's what our tool allows you to do.
That's fantastic. And is it, how does the user interface with it?
It's a desktop loaded,
Okay.
or tab. You can have it on your tablet, but I mean, think of it. It is, if you're familiar, most people are familiar with like an ERP system, like an SAP system, any type of dashboard. We really try and customize it to what the user already is comfortable with. Because one of the things that I've found is every customer in this space is a little bit different. And again, I think that comes from being a practitioner who has a problem that I am now trying to solve with technology versus being a technologist and saying, I'm just going to throw AI at the problem and it's going to solve it. I recognize the fact that everyone's going to have a different perspective in terms of what they need and how they need it. So for some of our customers we're talking to right now, it's more on capacity planning. They have major growth targets and they need to know if their supply chain can withstand that. Other customers are looking at, we actually are still at the beginning of the journey. We aren't really sure who our suppliers are past tier 1 or tier 2. That is part of what we do, but we help them do that with an eye towards, okay, then what would you do with that information? We provide the answer to the so what question.
Yeah, I love your approach because we share a similar approach at Saab, and that's the reason we created Scapa. I was a former operator. I held the problems. I was focused on solving them at the tactical edge. We put Scapa in San Diego to be very, very close to the end users, so we understood their problems almost as if they were our own. And I think that not only the customer intimacy, but the intimacy with the problem, where you almost feel like it's your own problem that you're trying to solve, I think is so important into ultimately delivering something that moves the needle, that provides value. And that's why you're doing Vantiv, right?
And that's why, again, you were talking about it earlier when I went to visit you guys in the office. And first of all, it's really fun to go to your office and be on the docks and then go on the boat in the afternoon. But just to be around people who are still in operator mode and want to actually still gravitate towards the really, really hard problems and try and solve them. And I think that that's why I've just really enjoyed our relationship so far, and looking forward to how we can do more fun stuff in the future.
Yeah, very excited about that. Who's your third co-founder, or who's your third partner? You mentioned one of the colleagues, but who's the third one?
So Veronica Daigle and Mark Esper are my co-founders.
Okay.
So it's the three of us as co-founders. Alex Patino is my head of product and engineering.
Okay.
And then I have Jody and Chris, who are my advisors, and I have one more engineer and a head of operations. So
Fantastic.
We're small but mighty.
Okay, and when this episode releases, you're coming out of stealth mode, and we're
open for business.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. Again, what a huge honor. So we're getting to the part of the episode that a lot of people tune in for. So I'm going to ask you, with all this wonderful experience that you've had up until this point, paint a vision for us of what the future of defense and security looks like going, into 26. We're about to, go into 26, 27, 28 and beyond. So whatever sort of time horizon you want, very, very broad question here. And you can go any direction with it that you want, and we'll just sort of follow you as you paint the picture of the future.
Okay. I am interested to see how all of these new and evolving technologies end up actually getting into the operational piece of it. And I think I tend to be a pretty curious person, so I'm always kind of seeing the forest and the trees at the same time. But I think about things like the work that I did with the Department of Energy on high-capacity lithium-ion batteries. That's obviously a technology that has exponentially grown in the last decade and really in the last 5 years, both on the commercial side and on the defense side. But what does it actually mean for us to create an infrastructure of that capability? And then how does it evolve and grow to be applied in all these different areas and facets of national security? And then what does that do in terms of its impact or not on the commercial space? One of the things for me in the defense industrial base that this sort of ties into is I admittedly am often very challenged when people harken back to the arsenal of democracy and, what we were able to do in 1937 and 38 and in terms of surge for World War II. And, if the balloon goes up and China invades Taiwan, what happens then? And I do fundamentally believe that when called upon, American industry will always answer. I fundamentally believe that. However, our geopolitical and geoeconomic environment is so foundationally different than it was in 1937. And the technologies that we use are foundationally different. I mean, if you look at the percentage of software that was used in Golden Dome when it was first created in the 70s versus the projected percentage of software that is going to be part of the new Golden Dome, it is magnitudes greater. Modular open systems architecture was not even a term that we used 5 or 6 years ago. So all of these things, I think, are sort of coming to a head in my mind. And I think that activity from the venture capital space, from entrepreneurs, from even the big primes that are doing the work to invest and make new discoveries, and then foundationally still build aircraft carriers and fighter jets and guns and ships. In addition to this current environment we're in, where there's a big push to change the way that the department acquires technology, I think there still needs to be a balance of respect for what has come before and understanding what the push and pull factors are and making sure that you get down to the nitty-gritty and the most boring parts of it, which are, like contracting officers are warranted. They have to do things a certain way by law. So if you want to change the way that they behave and the way that they do business and the way that they move forward in acquiring technology for the department, you have to look at that piece of it too. It's not really sexy. It doesn't make a big splash on the Washington Post or New York Times, but it will be foundationally helpful in moving the needle with regards to how we change the way we do business in the national security space. And I think I'm curious to see too, just how the current environment and then future environment plays out with our allies and partners. There's been a big push for the Europeans to spend more of their GDP on defense. And so you're now seeing a lot more investment in their own technology. And you know this from your time at NATO. There's a lot of great technology that our European counterparts can build. Do they have the scale in order to surge when we need them to? We're not sure yet. But I think all of those questions need to be answered so that we can come up with a new picture of what interoperability looks like.
Yeah, and this is right in our wheelhouse at Saab. So we're a Swedish aerospace and defense company with really hardcore engineering, amazing innovative products. And we are investing in the U.S. industrial base to diversify the U.S. industrial base, but also expand capacity across the U.S. So I think there's value coming this way into the U.S. as well. Just kind of going back to your supply chain experience and then projecting that forward, where are the biggest vulnerabilities? What are you most concerned about? Where are the choke points in terms of the supply chain for all the new capabilities that we're talking about here?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if we have time for all of them, but
yeah.
I think that one of the things that a lot of areas that have been issues for a long time remain issues. When we needed to surge production of 155s for Ukraine, it was a ball bearings choke point, which is pretty far down in the supply chain.
Yes.
We still source a lot of our critical energetics overseas. That makes everything fly and go boom. If you look at the CHIPS Act work, there's a lot of opportunity in that space in terms of creating more capacity domestically for semiconductors. But you have, 90 and 100 milliliter chips that are radiation hardened that are specifically used for defense applications, and they have absolutely no commercial application. So there is a lot of opportunity space there. And I think that with creativity and potentially more investment from the private sector in things that are not sexy and cool and cutting edge, but are more foundational to the technologies that we're fielding today, with the mind that those will evolve over time, but we're not going to sunset aircraft carriers and F-35s in the next decade, then I think that there will come an opportunity to balance that out. And one of the things that I think Vantiv can do in that space is to help demonstrate quantitatively what that balance looks like. One of the things that I worked on in my old job was with the Navy, when there was a 2-ship buy up for consideration on the Hill that ultimately got approved in legislation. And our office was the one who demonstrated what a 2-ship carrier buy would do in terms of helping build resiliency and consistency into the industrial base for aircraft carriers. Even though you buy those ships, as you know, you buy one and then 10 years later you buy the next one.
Yeah.
But there's so many things about the lower tier production lines and the workforce that they cannot handle the up and down swings of that. And so if you have a tool like Vantiv, which it can actually quantitatively show you from the ship all the way down to the drain cover that goes on top, what you build, how you build resiliency into it with these longer term plays, and ultimately save money over time. That is something that I'm looking forward to us being able to help illuminate and show.
Yeah, it's really the graduate level work. I mean, it's easy to do PowerPoints. It's easy to make, flashy commercials and this sort of stuff. But really, that graduate level work is so important in actually delivering on, the capabilities that our warfighters are depending on. And I think you're really addressing, like I said, a big problem, but also a niche where you've got deep expertise. How do you see this playing out with the new entrants, the established folks like us, that are kind of in between? How do you see this playing out over the next couple of years, or do you have an opinion on it, or we can just sort of go on?
No, I think that I'm just very curious about how it plays out. I think that this whole idea of like long range autonomous systems And there's still, when you talk to the operators and you talk to the joint staff and you talk to the department, there's still a need for manned systems alongside those unmanned systems.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just very curious to me to see how it plays out in terms of how it actually exponentially increases our deterrence capability, because you have the ability to do unmanned missions, to gather more intelligence, to posture with regards to power. But then I go back to, okay, well, what are the power requirements for those? Where are the chips coming from? Where are the batteries coming
Mm-hmm.
from? What other sectors of the economy or relying on those producers who gets priority? If we're in a peacetime scenario, who gets priority over that? And then I think a lot about infrastructure. That was part of my job too, was looking at critical infrastructure and like, what are our vulnerabilities there? And you have all these massive data centers. I mean, everyone talks about Virginia, and you drive around Northern Virginia and you think about, if something happened, man-made or not man-made, what would happen to all of our capabilities? What would that mean? How would we combat against that? If the internet goes down, it's like inconvenient on a personal level, but at a national level, bad things could happen. So like, what are we doing to think about protection of the homeland, protection of our data centers, critical infrastructure, that type of thing?
Coming back, just kind of pulling the battery thread here.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the Pacific is massive, large distances to cover. I mean, the power density in the lithium batteries just isn't there yet.
Right.
Like, do you see a breakthrough coming? And
to be honest, I haven't been following that as much anymore. Admittedly, like, there are more things that I want to dive deep into than I have time for.
Yeah.
But I think that that's a big piece of it. Like, how do you create power generation that can actually scale those massive distances? Or do you have, I know a number of the programs are looking at, like, you put a long range drone on a carrier or on a fighter jet, you get the jet on the carrier, you get it within a certain range, then you launch the fighter, then you launch the drone to cover the next distance. But it all comes back. I mean, it's a supply chain problem. It's a logistics problem. And I'm just very curious to see, I know there's a lot of smart people working on it, and I'm curious to see how they are thinking about it and how they solve for it.
Okay, now this is a special question because you came out of stealth mode on our podcast. Paint for me the future of Vantiv over the next year to 3, 4, 5 years. What does it look like? We're obviously going to scale really, really quickly, and
that's the hope.
So what's your dream scenario, or as you launch Vantiv?
So this year, 2026 is our year of telling people that we are here, we are open for business. So doing a lot of engagements like this, going to conferences, and just talking about the technology and my experience and why I'm building it. We are in the process of landing a couple of customers. So we're really looking forward to that and just moving the needle on the commercial side, because we do understand that the department has a big appetite for demonstrating commercial application of your technology before you come into the building. And I appreciate that. I mean, having worked on both sides, I think there's a lot of value in that. And I've never set out to build a defense tech company. I always wanted this to be a solution that can be applied across supply chains in all sectors of the economy. So landing a couple of paying customers as a startup is always a good thing. And then scaling the team. I also appreciate a really tight and effective team. And maybe that's because I played sports that didn't need I wasn't like on a football team. And just building the team to scale alongside our partners and getting deep into the problem set with our customers. That is ultimately, we will be a SaaS B2B platform. That is something that we can sell. But in these early stages, and also I do think the opportunity space, given where the companies are right now, they want you to work hand in hand with them. And we have some really exciting problem sets we've been given that I just cannot wait to solve, because they would really fundamentally change the way some of these companies are doing business in a very positive way, I believe.
I've met a lot of CEOs, through my time here at Saab, but also out at the edge at Task Force 59. When I saw you, sort of your passion for the problem and your greater passion for the solution, I was just drawn to you. And I said,
you.
Right then, can we have you on the Scapa podcast? I really am excited for the future of your company and believe you're adding tremendous value to a problem that a lot of people just sort of hand wave, or they or it's too hard that they really can't go vertical on it like you have. And I'm just really excited for you and the future of Vantiv, which just came out of stealth mode here on the Scapa podcast.
Well, thank you very much.
So, Brennan, thank you for joining us, and good luck. And maybe we'll have you back in a couple of years to see if your prediction came true.
That would be great. I'd love that.
All right. Thanks, Brennan.
Thanks.
And please do like and subscribe to the Scapa podcast, Creating the Future. And please share with all your friends.